My guest today is so cool. I really love the way he thinks, the types of questions he's asking, the way he's looking at cardiovascular health. My guest is Dr. Stephen Hussey. He's a chiropractor and functional medicine practitioner. He has a doctorate of chiropractic and master's in human nutrition and functional medicine from the University of Western States in Portland, Oregon. He's a health coach, speaker, and he's the author of two books on health. The first being The Health Evolution: Why Understanding Evolution is the Key to Vibrant Health, and the second one is Understanding the Heart. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Understanding the Heart: Surprising Insights into the Evolutionary Origins of Heart Disease and Why It Matters. If you happen to follow Dr. Hussey on Instagram, you probably already like, ooh, yay, I can't wait to listen to this. Like, he just has such compelling personal story, which I'm not going to spoil, so just check it out. And also questions he's asking with data to back up his points of view that are just so compelling in terms of how we're looking at heart health. So good. So yeah, I'm just not going to take up any more time. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hussey. So here we go. This is Dr. Stephen Hussey. Okay, so Dr. Hussey, I have been so excited for this interview, and I can't believe it took me this long to get you on. One of my clients was like, "Hey, you should have Stephen Hussey on." I'm like, "Oh, why have I not had Stephen Hussey on my podcast?" So thank you for coming on, and we're going to talk all about the heart today, and that's the name of your book, is Understanding the Heart. And really, I think such a powerful part of who you are and what you bring to the health table is your own personal story with this. So would you mind sharing that story with the audience?
Of course, yeah. Yeah, I mean, just like most people in this space, it started with, health issues that I, worked to overcome. And those started at a very young age. I had a lot of inflammatory conditions from the age of 2. I had asthma. I had really bad allergies. I used to break out in like giant hives all over my body. And the doctors didn't know why. I had irritable bowel syndrome, ended up at age 9 being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, quote unquote autoimmune in nature. That's the
Mhm.
theory. Yeah, my parents and I were just kind of relying on Western medicine to manage these things. And that's the key word: manage.
Yeah.
No explanation of why they were happening, just kind of suppress the symptoms with different drugs and things. And it wasn't until college, when I started getting interested in health, that I found that the way I live my life directly impacted my ability to manage these conditions and ultimately, in the long run, get rid of most of them, aside from the type 1 diabetes that I had. That's kind of like collateral damage. The damage had been done. But yeah, no longer hives, no longer IBS, none of that stuff. And, went on, living my life and being curious about health, digging deeper, but always having heart disease in the back of my head because I've been trained by physicians as a kid and young adult, that having type 1 diabetes heavily predisposes you to heart disease.
Mm.
And this is like disease of the small blood vessels in the body. So in the eyes and in the kidney and in the extremities. This is why we have neuropathy and things like that. So anything about heart disease always piqued my interest. And I found that, I learned the conventional way of thinking about the heart and heart disease. And then more unconventional ways. I always just read things with no filter, no real preconceived notions. And then, to my shock and surprise, at the age of 34, I had a massive heart attack. And, just to, give some people some background, leading up to that and why I think it happened. I was under a lot of stress at the time. It was during COVID. There's a lot of things happening that I didn't really stand for, and it was frustrating to me. And then I actually got some of the worst news of my life, or most stressful news of my life, a day and a half before I had the heart attack.
Wow.
And it wasn't necessarily the news itself, even though that was stressful. It was the inability of me or my family to do anything about that news for this
Mm.
person. We were just sitting and waiting, hoping that they would be
Mm.
okay.
Mm.
And so that was stressful. And then, I think there was an aspect of dehydration at the time, considering what I was doing, the way I was eating, and not replenishing electrolytes and water. I think there was an aspect of oxalate dumping that was happening because of the way I was eating. And then ultimately, I think the straw that broke the camel's back was I unwisely did a very intense workout the morning I had the heart attack. I woke up in this state of stress and dehydration and all this stuff. And I did my usual like sprint up a hill, drop and do push-ups till you fail, do lunges till you fail, that kind
Mm,
of thing. And then
right.
maybe about 30 minutes later, it happened. And
Wow.
so all that kind of stuff led up to it. But, being type 1, I'm predisposed. And, but interestingly, 6 months before the heart attack, I had a CAC score done, which is a measure of calcification of plaque in heart arteries. And mine was 0. There was no calcification, which is a very good, healthy score. That doesn't measure soft plaque in the arteries. However, when they did the heart cath and angiogram to place the stent when I was having a heart attack, they found no atherosclerosis anywhere.
Wow.
All they found was a giant clot that had formed in my left anterior descending artery. So it was a spontaneous acute clot, which is, I would argue, how most heart attacks happen, despite what we're told. And um, so yeah, that plunged me even deeper into heart disease, and figuring out why this had happened. And I had, written about three-quarters of the book before it happened, and then
Oh, wow.
fortunately, I hadn't finished it because I was allowed to go back and add to it,
Whoa.
because nothing I had written before changed. I mean, the research and everything that I'd written stayed the same. It was just I was able to add the story and add my experience in the hospital, which was terrible, to it. And I could probably make the book 25, 50% longer at this point, learning what I've
Yeah.
learned since then.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that some people aren't aware of is that after the heart attack, well, first of all, I did very little of what they recommended, based on my knowledge, and that was my personal decision. And my heart completely recovered within 3 months. And then after the heart attack, because of a part of the procedure they did, which we can get into if you want, I developed a narrowing or atherosclerosis of the artery in my leg, which was restricting blood flow to the lower part of my leg, and I couldn't walk even. Definitely couldn't snowboard or play soccer or do all these things that I like to do. And through doing things that I did, which was again not their recommendations, I completely reversed that as well. And over a time span of 2 years, and I just had the second clear normal test for it in May, that it's still normal. So here I am being told that your heart will never recover, your leg will never recover unless you rest and take all these medications, which I was told I would be on 6 medications for the rest of my life. And I did not do those things, and I did my own health things and used the information that I gained about the heart and heart disease, and I'm completely recovered, and with something that they said that they just don't see people recover from.
Wow, thanks for sharing all that, and I'm so curious about, like, so you were already writing a book about the heart when you had a heart attack?
Mhm.
Was the motivation to write about the heart because of all the fear that, you kinda had been given your whole life of you might end up having heart issues because of type 1? Like, what was your motivation in writing the book in the first place?
I guess that, yeah, so like since I had been interested in the heart because of my likelihood to have heart disease as
Right,
a type 1
okay.
diabetic, at least that's what I'd told. I had
Uh-huh,
always researched it.
I
Anything
see.
I could read about the heart and heart disease, I
Right.
would pick up. And there was a lot of misconceptions, everything from the cholesterol theory of heart disease to the actual true function of the heart, which is not to move blood throughout the body, in my opinion, to why heart cancer is so rare, which is the rarest place of cancer by far of any organ in the body, and all these different interesting things that I'd come across. And I was like, well, and I'd started sharing that on social media, some of it, and people seemed to like it. So I was like, well, I like to write. I'll write a book about it.
Wow.
And then found myself in the situation where I had the heart attack and was able to, use that as the introduction. And the very short-sighted, very close-minded, and shut down of conversation care that I received in the hospital, was able to add that to, this is how much we've misunderstood the heart, but also goes to show that, because I'd always been very strict about diet and ate whole food diets,
Mhm.
various types of whole food diets, yet still happened. So to me, one of my big missions today is heart disease is not just about diet. And
Right.
I would argue that it's not even the main contributor to heart disease. Diet either being what protects or prevents heart disease.
Mm.
And it's much more about many other things that can damage an artery, and how heart attacks actually happen, and that it's clotting material and has nothing to do with cholesterol. There's so much um, uh, nuance that I think is misunderstood about the whole process.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Mm. It feels like some sort of divine intervention, like, Here, this is your purpose." Like, holy crap, I can't believe that happened.
Well,
And
and to that point, yes, like it's obviously a bad thing that happened. And I wish that it hadn't happened, but
right,
the amount of people that connect with me now because I've
right,
been through it, and the
right.
amount of people that have come to me and I've been able to help because I've been through it, and the
Mhm,
knowledge that I have, that's been the most rewarding thing. And it's almost like, it's hard to completely regret that it happened
mhm.
because I'm helping change people's lives.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of us have been through painful experiences that have brought us into where we're at and can really relate with that.
Mhm.
In terms of, like, after it happened, you acknowledge, like, yeah, likely I was dehydrated, probably salt, minerals, things were low, very stressed on top of stress. Were there any other things, like, after that happened, like, even if they were things you had already written about, but that, like, after that happened, you were like, "Wow, this is really important." You know what I mean?
Yes. Um, I think the main things that I was sort of aware of, but not necessarily practicing, was my infrared light exposure at the time, which naturally comes from the sun.
Mhm,
But I recruited an infrared sauna to
mhm,
do that as well. My contact with the earth,
mhm,
grounding, I was not doing as well as I should. And then circadian rhythm was
mhm,
huge,
mhm.
as far as something that I was not really, aware of, but not fully
Practicing.
practicing.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I'd always been able to control diet, something I could do. I could control that.
Wow.
I control what I put in my mouth. Other things were somewhat out of my control, took more work. And so yeah, I, kind of learned the lesson there. And knowing what I know now, which I'm happy to explain the mechanisms of why those things would prevent a heart attack. But knowing what I know now, if I had been doing those things, I think I would have been protected um, from that. But hindsight's 2020. I'm
Yeah.
here today still, and
Yeah.
still doing, what I think I should be doing. So it's all good.
Yeah, I definitely feel like it's a everything happens for a reason kind of thing.
Mhm.
So I live in Hawaii now. It's 70 something degrees year round. A really hot day is like low 80s. It's pretty nice weather-wise here year round. I have never experienced that in my life before. And this, what you just talked about, has been on my mind a lot in terms of how complicated we are making everything because we're just not out here. We're
Mhm.
just not. And even me right now, like, I'm on my deck, but that's nice. I appreciate the bird sounds and the breeze and seeing nature and being around nature. It's not the same as being in direct sunlight during parts of the day. It's not the same as when a day that I go and I'm in the ocean and I'm getting sun. I don't sleep the same. I don't feel the same, and I also don't eat the same. Right. Like, I think we all have experienced, if you're on some camping trip or big outdoors thing. You're not like sitting there like hiding in a corner, like binging on Reese's cups.
Mhm.
You're like in a much healthier flow with your hunger and satiety, um, your mood, energy, sleep like a baby. And so I love that you're hitting on this topic. It's been so on my mind since moving here. And also circadian rhythm is something that I've really gotten into, really made a part of my life since like 2022.
Mhm.
And I can't even believe, like, I'm trying to, like, I'm like from the rooftops. I'm like, dude, if you will just go to bed about the same time every night and then like wake up and like get the sun in your eyes and like have some slow in the morning and then like
Mhm.
kind of intermittent fast stress and let yourself come back down again and like it's so good. So
Mhm.
let's go on this. And yeah, and talking about your perspective in terms of
Mhm.
how that impacts the heart.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about heart disease, there's lots of different categories. There's atherosclerosis, which is plaque forming in the arteries. There's heart attacks or cardiac arrests. There's heart failure. There's heart arrhythmias. And the main one that people that talk about a lot is atherosclerosis, like when we get plaque formation on the arteries. So, and people think that that is what eventually causes heart attacks. Most cardiologists think that that is what eventually causes heart attacks, and I disagree.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's the case, and I'm happy to explain why. So let's talk about coronary arteries. So, and damage to an artery can happen anywhere in the body. And when damage happens, if the repair mechanisms aren't robust enough, or there's insulin resistance or things interfering with the repair mechanisms, then the body has to do something to repair the artery. And that is lay down clotting tissue. Just like if you cut your skin, cut your
Mm.
arm, like your body has to form a scab to stop the bleeding. So if the inside of an artery is damaged, it has to lay down this clotting tissue. When you analyze atherosclerosis in people on autopsy and people are alive, it's like 87% plus or minus 8% clotting tissue, um, according to one study. And so that's what happens when we have damage. There's very little cholesterol present. And cholesterol does get involved in the process at some point, but it's mainly because it's involved in the process of creating clotting tissue, or it gets caught up in the process as it's forming clotting tissue. So we have to ask ourselves, what causes clotting tissue? What causes clotting to happen? And so back in 1856, Rudolf Virchow determined that what causes clotting is when we get damage to the lining of an artery, when we get poor, stagnant, or interrupted blood flow, or when we get elements of blood clumping together. Okay, and those have held true in medicine since that time. Those are the things that cause pathologic clotting in the bloodstream in the arteries. And so, if we look at what's called structured water in the body, which structured water is water in a kind of fourth state. We all know that water is solid liquid gas. So we can have it in ice, water, or steam, but there's actually a fourth state in which it can exist, and that is more like a gel. So you can think like Jello, or the consistency of raw egg white, kind of that gelatinous sponginess. And most of the water in our body is in this state, which is why if you touch the muscle of your forearm, it kind of gives and bounces back because it's a gel, just like Jello or congealed bone broth. And so this water does form in the lining of the arteries. So structured water will form in any situation where the water is energized, which means it holds energy from infrared light, and it's next to a hydrophilic surface, which means a water-loving surface. So hydrophobic would mean like fat droplets that are in water, they're hydrophobic, so they stick together away from the water. Hydrophilic means it loves water. And so next to a hydrophilic surface, water, quote unquote, structures itself into this gel-like form. And that happens on the lining of the arteries. And this has been proven in Dr. Gerald Pollack's lab at University of Washington. And there's many, many scientists before Dr. Pollack that have discovered or come across structured water, and they've called it many different things because they all discovered it at different times. And so this structured water does three very, very important things for us in the arteries. One, structured water has also been nicknamed exclusion zone water because it performs like an almost impenetrable barrier. So if it's next to the lining of the arteries, nothing can really touch the arteries if we have intact, healthy, structured water there. Also, so that's Virchow strat number one, protect the arteries, prevent damage from the arteries. We build structured water. And then the second thing that it does is that because of the way structured water forms, structured water is very electronegatively charged. And because it cleaves off a hydrogen, which is very positively charged, then it lines up next to that negatively charged area, and we get a positive area next to a negative area. And that's a battery. That's what we know. When we put a battery in something, we have to align the charges. And so that actually creates energy. And so they've actually put electrodes from a light bulb into the positive and negative end of structured water, and it powers the light bulb. And so in the artery, this energy that's created with that situation actually does the work of moving fluid, which is why we don't necessarily need a forcefully pumping heart to move blood in tubes, because the blood is about half water. And this is the mechanism by which it moves. And they've actually proven this. I have a really fascinating video from Dr. Pollack's lab on my computer that shows that this is happening after the heart has stopped moving. The blood continues to flow. And so that's Virchow's triad number 2.
Mm.
We create blood flow and we prevent stagnant blood flow. And then the third thing that it does is that structured water also forms on elements of blood, like red blood cells and lipoproteins and anything in the blood. And so since structured water forms on those and it's very electronegatively charged, then all the elements of blood should have a negative charge. And negative or like charges don't like each other, they repel. So nothing sticks together, right? They all stay evenly spaced in the blood. And so that's Virchow's triad number 3,
Mm.
is we keep elements of blood from sticking together. So if people are familiar with an erythrocyte sedimentation rate test,
Mhm.
ESR, it's a marker of how readily elements of blood, like red blood cells, stick together. So
Mm.
if you have a high or a ESR that's clumps together, it's measuring that it's clumping together too fast. You have low structured water in your arteries
Mm.
because they're clumping together. And so if we want to prevent clotting, which is ultimately what atherosclerosis is, and it's what the end result of stroke or heart attack, it's a clotting issue, a clot forms, then we need to put ourselves in an environment that encourages structured water to form. And that is, like you talked about, nature. The things that build structured water and energize water so that it structures itself on biological surfaces is sunlight or infrared light mainly, but all colors and wavelengths of light will do it. Grounding, being in direct contact with the earth, has been shown to increase the structured water on red blood cells. We talk about being in natural bodies of water. That's the ultimate grounding right there, because you're totally immersed in it. Just moving your body, especially to the point of creating heat, structures water and creates a piezoelectric effect that builds electrons that structure water in the body. So like, being in nature, the sounds of nature will do it too. All this, like, we're removing ourselves from that. So you talked about like how, you notice a difference just from sitting on your deck there or being immersed in nature. You notice the difference there. Imagine someone who is sitting in an office under artificial light, surrounded by electromagnetic fields, eating artificial food. Like
Oh
it's just like
man.
the most wrong environment for the human body
Mm.
to do these things. It's like, no
Oh,
wonder we have this epidemic
right.
of heart disease. Now, just to take it further, and why I don't believe that atherosclerosis is causing heart attacks is because when this happens, say we do get damage to the lining of the artery in a coronary artery, which that happens most commonly in coronary arteries because they're under the most pressure of any artery. So if there is things that damage the artery, it's pushed up against the lining of the artery more because of that pressure. And so that can damage the structured water and then damage the glycocalyx, then damage the endothelia and the artery. And then when that gets damaged, then we get clotting tissue forming. And that happens more so in type 2 diabetics because they're insulin resistant. And when they're insulin resistant, that impairs repair mechanisms. So now not only is the damage happening, the repair can't happen. And so the body has to deposit clotting tissue, almost like spackle, trying to patch it up,
Yeah.
And so if that happens, it can create this stenosis or narrowing of an artery, like as it can slowly grow like that. And the thought is that that stenosis, that plaque, can become damaged and rupture, right? And if it ruptures, the body has a clotting response and it blocks the artery. However, there's a really interesting paper called The Myth of the Vulnerable Plaque,
Mm.
written in 2015, and it goes through all the literature based on this vulnerable plaque theory. And basically, at the end of the paper, they determined that there's not much evidence for it, and they say that plaque ruptures do indeed happen, but their number is 0.06% of the time does it result in heart attack.
Wow.
So lots of times the plaque ruptures and the body just puts a Pivers cap on it and the stenosis grows, right?
Mm.
Now, the other theory is that the stenosis gets big enough and it narrows the artery enough that there's very little blood flow. However, the work of Giorgio Beraldi, who wrote a whole book on his findings, his lifelong work of his findings, found that, and he did multiple autopsies on multiple hearts. And you ever been to like the Body World exhibits, or the Animals Inside Out, where they do like dissections of the body, and there's those cool things like that. Well, there's a technique in there where like they dissolve, like they inject the arterial system of different animals or
Okay. Yeah.
organs
Yeah.
with a plastic material, and then the plastic
Mm,
material hardens, and then they dissolve away
mm.
all the rest of the tissue with hydrochloric acid, and they're left with this arterial system. And he invented that.
Cool.
Beraldi invented
Okay,
that
cool.
procedure to study hearts.
Mhm.
And what he found, though, is that anywhere there was a more than 60 or 70% narrowing of an artery in the heart, the body had built a vast network of collaterals around it to
Oh, wow.
bypass it, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I always talk about, in Jurassic Park when Dr. Malcolm says, "Oh, and life will find a way,"
Yeah, yeah.
that's kind of what's happening. And
Wow.
so um, sometimes the collaterals or form they form enough that they're always form enough to keep you alive, but sometimes they're not so robust and people can have chest pain still. There's some cases, case studies that Dr. Tim Noakes talks about where people run marathons on collateral artery circulation. They have 100% blockage of an artery and they still run a
Whoa.
marathon because they have collateral circulation. And what dictates how well the collaterals form is blood flow. So again, that's putting yourself back into that environment that creates structured water and creates blood flow. And
Mm.
then, so the collateral arteries, they help us understand why, when you look at all the studies, and I've looked and looked and looked at all these studies about bypass procedures and elective stent placements, like stent placements where they do an angiogram, they see a 50% narrowing and they put a stent in electively, not during a heart attack, but electively. If you look at those studies, I have yet to find a study that shows that they're beneficial.
Mm.
They all say that whether you have the procedure or not, you're just as likely to have a heart attack in the long run. And
Wow.
it's because if you have collateral arteries, stenting that stenosis isn't going to help. You've already got collateral circulation. Building a bypass around it with a vein from your leg isn't going to help. You've already got collateral circulation.
Wow.
The issue with heart attacks is clotting. It's
Mm.
not these stenoses. And so Western medicine has made a lot of money treating the stenosis, treating the narrowing of the artery, but they're not doing anything to prevent clotting. They're not putting anything with the body in any sort of environment to prevent clotting besides taking blood thinners, which eventually have long-term side effects of mineral depletion and excess
Mhm.
bleeding. So that's my spiel on heart disease and coronary heart disease, atherosclerosis of the coronary arteries. And I've kind of put it all together with a lot of different research that I've read. But it makes sense what happened to me, and it makes sense of what happens to a lot of people and what we see in the literature.
Wow, that was super enlightening. Thank you. Let's hit cholesterol.
Yeah. Um, so I mean, maybe your followers are familiar with the Ansel Keys story, and how,
I would think a lot of them, but just in case, quick
yeah, for
overview.
sure. So, back in the 50s, Eisenhower famously had a heart attack in the Oval Office, and heart disease was on the rise, which should be the first red flag right there. We've been eating animal foods for since however long you believe humans have been on this earth. We've been eating animal foods, and there's even evidence that I talk about in my book that it was the diet that made us human. We ate a high amount of animal foods, and so heart disease has been a relatively new thing. Like in the early 1900s, the American cardiology, just wasn't a thing. There was very few cardiologists. It just wasn't
Mm.
needed. And then in the 50s, it started to rise. Heart disease started to rise. And so people were looking for an answer. And this one scientist, Dr. Ansel Keys, gave people an answer. He did these studies where he looked at amounts of cholesterol and saturated fat eaten in different countries, and he compared it to rates of heart disease. And he said, look, the more saturated fat and cholesterol people eat, the more heart disease we have. However, there was data from 22 countries available at the time, and he took the data from the 6 countries that gave him the correlation that he wanted. And then later he repeated it again with 7 countries. And then I think it was maybe 5 or 10 years later, 2 other scientists repeated the study and used all 22 countries available at the time, and they found no correlation whatsoever.
Mhm.
However, the real problem is that these are correlation studies. They're not causation. So you can't show causation from these things. So basically, these types of studies are the lowest form of research, and they're on the bottom of the pyramid for a reason. And what they do, all they can do is show that 2 things are happening at the same time, but they can't show that one is really causing the other. So it's like if I'm standing on the sidewalk and I see a traffic jam in front of me, and I also see that it's cloudy, I can't say
Right,
that the traffic jams cause the clouds or the clouds cause the traffic
right,
jam. You just can't make that assumption. And
right.
that's what these studies were, and that's what most of our nutrition research is based on those studies, because it's very expensive to do nutrition randomized controlled trials.
Mhm.
And so they're based on these types of things.
Mhm.
And there was lots of, I guess, questionable things that happened when they tested the theory, which there was 5 or 6 big major trials that actually tested the theory of saturated fat causing heart disease. They replaced saturated fat in the diet with unsaturated fat. And in all those studies, they found that the more unsaturated fat people ate, the more heart disease they had, the more all-cause mortality from anything they had. And so those studies were kind of hush-hushed and pushed aside and not published in big journals like they should have been, or published much later than they should have been. And so it was kind of, and the reason that is because there was a lot of money behind the idea that saturated fat and cholesterol cause heart disease. That was the big push because companies saw an opportunity, to, like, if you can convince the world that saturated fat and animal foods cause heart disease, then the cereal, sugar, grain industries could all make a lot of money from that. Breakfast was invented pretty much, and the
Mhm.
breakfast cereal was invented. And then if you can convince the world that cholesterol causes heart disease, pharmaceutical companies could now sell more drugs because they have a drug that lowers cholesterol. And that's the number one, number two every year prescribed drug in the United States is a statin drug. And so, but the results of that approach is that heart disease has continued to rise consistently since that time. So that's having no or little effect. So, in my opinion, cholesterol is a complete wild goose chase, and we're barking up the wrong tree. It literally tells us almost nothing about risk of heart disease, in my opinion, looking at
Mhm.
lipids on a blood panel. Blood work in general can be seen as kind of a hyper reality, but
Mhm.
all cholesterol tells us is what our bodies are choosing to metabolize at the time. So if we are more of a sugar burner, a glucose burner, then our body is taking that glucose and turning it into triglycerides, and our triglycerides can be higher in the blood. And because our body is trying to deliver the glucose in the form of triglycerides, converting it to triglycerides to the tissues. If we are burning more fats, then our body is packaging those fats into LDL, and our LDL can go up, and because the body's trying to deliver that energy to the cells. So that's why some people on low carb or ketogenic diets have very elevated LDL, because what Dave Feldman has called lean mass hyperresponders, because they're trying to deliver lots of energy. And so, but there seems to be no difference in risk. And Dave Feldman and the work that he's
Right.
doing is showing that very clearly now.
Mhm.
And then there's actually a really interesting study, or just a, pretty much one person experiment done by a scientist at Harvard, where he tested this. He's a ketogenic diet and he has high LDL on that diet. And then he ate 6 Oreos a day or something like that, or maybe twice a day. And the LDL dropped significantly. And then he did the same thing. He went back on his low carb diet and his LDL went
No.
back up, and he took a statin drug. And the Oreos were more effective than the statin drug. So by that by that experiment, which is just a one person experiment, and they could do a
Right.
bigger experiment, but
Yeah.
by that, if cholesterol causes heart disease, then we should all be eating Oreos to lower our
Wow.
cholesterol, which is, we
Wow.
know it sounds ridiculous, right?
Mm.
It's been a complete distraction from what the actual
Mhm.
causes of heart disease are.
Mhm.
And everybody's so freaked out about their cholesterol and their numbers, and they're trying to overanalyze cholesterol. And now they're talking about all these different subfractions of cholesterol. It doesn't matter how you slice it up. I mean, Einstein said that, we can't solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. So I
Right.
don't care how you measure cholesterol, it's not going to give us the answer. The
Right.
answer is the structured water, go back into nature, the things we talked about. That's what we're deficient in. We're deficient in
Right.
that stuff.
Nature. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I looked into this myself. My mom passed away this past November and she had type 2 diabetes for a
Mhm.
while. She had some early dementia. We could tell there was some dementia going on. And I haven't even said this ever to my audience or anything, but I was going through my voicemails. I had a bunch of voicemails from my mom that I hadn't deleted. And like, it was like the second most recent one from when she passed. And her voice went from, like, her normal kinda sweet little, like, voice, to completely slurred speech, couldn't understand what she was saying at all, and
Mm,
but you can make it out if you really listen, and she's saying, my doctor said I have to get back on these statins. I don't like these statins. I don't like the way they make me feel, but he said I have to take them." And my mom had a stroke, like, a month later. Now, I'm not saying that that's, like, why or whatever, but it's like, okay, yeah, that really helped, you know? It
mm,
didn't. It didn't help anything. She had a
yeah,
stroke because she had type 2 diabetes and a lot of things going on for a long time, and she had a really stressful event, and that's what happened, you know? And, she didn't, this was a long time ago.
yeah,
She didn't pass away from that stroke, but it
mm,
definitely, did her in, like, she kinda was gone. It was the first phase of my mom being gone, you know?
yeah,
And I don't know, and even if you just look into statins, and if you just even look into this research, it's just, like, over and over and over, it's not cholesterol isn't just look into it. If this is an area in your own personal health, just actually go read studies and see yourself, or just go to Dave Feldman's work and
mhm,
kinda, like, point you in the right direction,
yeah,
and you also, um and, um yeah, I wanted to see if you could talk about your cholesterol a
mm,
little bit during your healing journey.
yeah. So here, I'll tell this story then. Um, so after the heart attack, they did a heart cath and they went into the leg and the artery in my leg and my groin to go up and place the stent, which I could argue they may or may not have needed to, but it's hindsight. Like they saved my life. I'm grateful for them. They
Yeah.
did what they had to do.
Mhm.
And I'm still here. So, but they placed the stent and then so that slit that they made in my leg there in the artery, they sealed it up with a device called the angioseal. And the reason they use that is because it allows the artery to heal quicker. So for most people, for a lot of people, laying stagnant in a bed, which for like 36, 48 hours to try and let that artery heal is a problem because you get clotting, right? Um, may or may not have been a problem for me as in the health that I was in. But they used it and so I could sit up within 12 hours, right? However, that device, like here's the lumen of the artery, the device sits on the inside of it like this. So it's kind of like on a river when water's flowing past a rock and it kind of eddies on the other side, right? So it disrupts blood flow. And what happened was about 2 months after the heart attack, when I started being active again, I was walking and I developed this pain in my leg. And I didn't know what it was. I was like, what is this? Like a deep vein thrombosis? Am I getting compartment syndrome? What is going on? And then I eventually figured out that there was the testing showed 75 to 99% stenosis blockage of the blood flow to my lower leg because of the disrupted blood flow from that angioseal. At least that's my interpretation of it. And I found research that shows that it can disrupt blood flow and it could do that, even though the
Yeah.
vascular surgeons were like, no, no, it's not the case.
Yeah.
Whatever. Um, I don't understand how it couldn't be. Literally, I did a sprint
Yeah.
workout the morning I had the
Right.
heart attack. My leg was fine. And it's the
Right.
same leg they did the procedure on. Like
Right.
this is adding up here. So anyways, we decided not to do anything about it because it wasn't affecting my day to day. It was just I couldn't do some things I enjoy, like snowboard or play soccer or be as
Yeah.
active as I usually am.
Yeah.
Um, but they say when we start messing with them, they usually get worse. So we just left it alone. And so I started doing my things, which I was already kind of doing for the heart, which is lots of infrared sauna, lots of sunlight, lots of grounding, lots of circadian rhythm stuff. Those are the big four things that I changed. And and my diet stayed the same. My stress unfortunately stayed about the same for a little while after that. And most other parts of my lifestyle stayed the same. A year after that first test, um, doing lots of sauna, probably 6 days a week, lots of sunlight, all that stuff. Um, the the stenosis in that artery had dropped to 50% on the second test. And the technician came back in and said, we're going to test it again because I don't know if this is right. And they tested it again. It was still 50% narrowed. And the vascular surgeon at that point said, well, we can't say that it's better because we just don't see these things get better. And I was like, well, the testing just showed that it's not 99% blocked now, it's 50% blocked. So then a year later, I came back, the test was completely normal. There was no stenosis of that artery. There was no restriction in blood flow into my leg. And I thought that was going to be the case because about 2 months prior to that test, I played soccer, just tried it out, and I was able to for about an hour just with
Mm.
some family and friends. And so I was like, well, this is indicative that something's better. And then just a few months ago, I had the last test, and it's still normal. So it's been normal for over a year now. And the device is still in there. So I would imagine that if I stopped doing these things that were healing my artery, then it may come back. But that was the only thing I changed. And I'm telling the story because you asked about my cholesterol. And during this entire process of reversing atherosclerosis, which is supposedly caused by cholesterol, right? My cholesterol was much higher than what is recommended. It was mostly in the 2 to 300s, but there's times when it was over 500. So I reversed atherosclerosis with levels much higher than it's supposed to be, right? So which
Mhm.
tells me, an N of one experiment, that it is not about cholesterol. That is
Mhm.
not what causes this. It's about energy. It's about lack of energy to the system. And when there's lack of energy, which that energy is held in structured water, when there's lack of energy to the system suffers. And the vascular system takes the hit first because it's where everything is transported. It's where something is constantly moving through it, which creates friction. Um, so that's the answer. That's what's causing heart disease, is those things there. And when you do things to build structured water and protect the arteries, they're allowed to heal. And mine did. So I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah. I'm curious, your sauna, is it like red light, near infrared, far infrared, or like what is in there?
So far infrared sauna is what I use.
Okay.
And as far as I know, the one I have emits the highest amount of far infrared.
Okay.
And so that's why I got that one. Um, but near infrared, like far
Mhm.
infrared, according to Dr. Pollock's lab, is the most structuring to water. You'll get the biggest
Okay.
amount of structured water if you use far infrared, which is the farthest wavelength from the sun, or on the spectrum of the sun. It goes
Uh-huh.
far infrared all the way to UV.
Mhm.
And then there's visible light in the middle. So the 3000 nanometer wavelength.
Mhm.
But near infrared will do it.
Mhm.
Red light will do it. So even people who have red light panels and near infrared panels, like those are
Mhm.
hugely beneficial too. The sun is always
Yeah.
best.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even blue light will do it. Blue light, well, blue light in the study that says this kind of stuff it always says blue light in what does it say? Blue light in natural quantities or at real
Yeah.
world doses is what it says, which
Right.
means
Nice.
balanced by
Sun.
other colors of light.
Right.
It's never supposed to be on its own, like these
Right.
artificial blue lights that we have or LED screens that we
Right.
have, right?
Right.
So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, there's rainbows for a reason, like, like, it's a little reminder, like,
Yeah,
all
you're
the
in
light
Hawaii. It's rainbows everywhere.
yeah, there are a lot of rainbows, and it's always a wonderful reminder of, like, I am someone who geeks out on sunlight and circadian rhythm and nature and how important it is for health, and I see these rainbows, and it's just like it looks like this little, like, mother nature reminder of, like, all these light spectrum, all these colors are here in these rays, just in case you were
Yeah.
wanting to know. Just letting you know, and we're gonna make it really pretty for you too.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
little information for you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think, as I reflect on a lot of things you're saying, I have, I guess, compassion in certain ways for people who are stuck in the Western medicine model. This whole, like, I admit sometimes, I saw you made a post about this too, like, why aren't doctors more curious, And I
Mhm.
think that all the time. I'm like, I'll get in my little fits and I'm like, how can you have all these people coming in with hypothyroidism and just be like, here's your medication and not be like, I wonder why all these people have hypothyroid. Like, why? And then I grow up a little and I remember that they are stuck in a system that it takes a lot of courage and, like, scary financial decisions and all sorts of things to ever get out of, right? You're
Mhm.
in this nice cushy system of, like, big pharma's contributing to everything, the insurance company, you're like in that system, and it'd be a lot to get out of. And so I have compassion, and
Mhm.
also I'm also really grateful for All the functional medicine doctors, like I call this area like the revenge of the chiropractors, because like chiropractors used to get so much garbage and now like a lot of them have become more functional medicine doctors and are
Yeah.
bringing up really cool, interesting conversations like this and looking at things
Mhm.
from more of the root cause angle than the treatment angle. And so I'm like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah, yeah. That's cool. Yeah, yeah, chiropractors historically, like, they took a lot of heat from medicine, but
Yes.
there was actually a committee put together by the American Medical Association to disband chiropractic.
Right.
Um, yeah, and they, wrongfully accused chiropractors of practicing medicine without a license and did all this stuff and jailed a lot of chiropractors. And
J-hold?
oh yeah, they went to jail for pretty
Wow,
much no reason.
wow.
And they yeah, it was crazy. And it was all because medicine saw it as a threat. They saw
Yeah,
them as a threat to their product, right? Which was modern medicine. And that all happened with Rockefeller medicine back in the, early 1900s. And then eventually a Supreme Court, actually, I don't know if it was Supreme Court. It may have been Supreme Court ruled that that committee by the American Medical Association was unconstitutional, and they were to cease and desist immediately, and stop, these wrongful accusations about
wow.
chiropractors. They were just practicing chiropractic. They're not practicing, out of their scope of practice.
Mm,
And so yeah, it's just interesting that we kind of got that legal retribution. And then, yeah, now you can say we're coming around, and we're the ones that, and other practitioners too, not just chiropractors, naturopaths, all kinds of
yeah,
different practitioners.
mhm,
We're the ones that are now learning these alternative things. We're like, okay,
right,
how do we figure out how to heal people? Like,
mhm,
it's not just about this or that. We're not dogmatic. And then, like you
right,
say, yeah, unfortunately, even if, a medical doctor does start to question things, there's so many things keeping them in that model.
right,
Just preventing them from getting outside that box unless they take certain risks. That could be a risk against their livelihood, which, they like making what they make. They worked
right.
hard to get there. Medical school is not easy. Or
Well,
uh,
and they're so
yeah.
busy, it's like, or when are they
Mhm.
even supposed to have time to think?
Yeah, by the
You
time they
know?
get done with their day, they're just like, I'm gonna go home and chill. I don't have
Right.
time to think about anything else. And it's funny, a lot of the medical doctors that do come around, obviously, or lots of times it's like toward their retirement, they finally get some time and they're like, oh, this didn't make sense. But it's just that system, set up, and
Mhm,
it's set up that way for profit. And,
yeah,
I, people have trouble with that sometimes. And I kind of choose, even though I know a lot of things, I kind of choose not to feel that it's nefarious, even though sometimes I have
yeah,
information that tells me that it is. But all I
yeah,
can say is that for people is that you just have to be aware of it and then make
yeah,
decisions based on that information. That's all you
right,
can do. Instead
right,
of getting all pissed off and angry about that, it's going to be that way. All you can
right.
do is take that information and make the best decision for you going
Uh-huh,
forward.
yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, anybody in the functional world in any way, shape, or form is like, yeah, if I got in a car accident, like, thank God, for Western medicine. It's
Yeah.
like emergency rooms are so important. Thank you,
Yeah.
and sure, even some of those pharmaceutical drugs, somebody's like writhing in freaking pain, their whole body just got smashed. Like, yeah,
Mm.
grateful for all that for
Yeah,
them.
definitely. It's amazing what modern medicine can do. I actually just
Right.
recorded a post today, about this very thing, that, like,
Oh,
in a medical emergency, Western medicine in a westernized country is the absolute best place. They can do amazing things with,
totally.
like, if you have a heart attack, like in my situation, or you have
Totally.
traumas, or you have a life-threatening bacterial infection, something like that, like
Right.
amazing
Totally.
things. But
So
as soon
yeah.
as you're stable, as soon as you're
Yeah.
stable and there's no threat of going back into being unstable, it's the worst place to be. That
Yeah.
environment is the worst place for healing. The artificial
Mhm.
light, the unnatural EMFs, the food they serve,
Mhm. Mhm.
no contact with nature. Their only method is medications, which oftentimes, they can be needed, but oftentimes they're making things worse. Like, it's
Mhm.
the worst environment to be
Mhm.
as soon as you're stable. It's crazy how it shifts like
Mhm.
that. It's just boom, instantly.
Mhm. Mhm. It's kinda like the Western food system too, like, in terms of what's allowed or not, like, essentially, I see it the same way. If it's not gonna kill you, like, immediately, like, you ate that and dropped dead that day, unless it's that, it's all good. If we kinda know it's gonna kill you eventually, like, no, we're not too worried about that. Just, wanna cover our butts in case it
Yeah, yeah. It's
kills you, so we
crazy.
don't wanna be liable, but but long-term liability, that's gonna be hard to figure out, so we won't worry about that too much.
Yeah, yeah,
It's kinda
it's
the
crazy.
same way. Alright, God, did we hit on all your we hit on our, atherosclerosis and
Mhm.
also, cholesterol.
Yeah.
Was there any other aspect of the
I
heart
mean,
that
if you wanna go into how the heart's not a pump, we could do that. Um,
Sure, sure.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
um, yeah, so that's the main thinking that, because the heart's this contracting organ, that it must be this forceful pressure propulsion pump that's moving the blood throughout the body. And there's actually a large body of evidence that that is not the case. Some of it logical, some of it being that, a heart that size, there's no way that it could forcefully pump the amount of fluid that we have in our blood around the body. Just the physics of it or the energetics of it, like the amount
yeah.
of energy it would take to do that. We would need a heart.
Mm,
There's some scientists say the heart the size of a whale to do that,
wow.
a whale's heart. And so yeah, plus, like, logically, it doesn't make sense. If I was gonna pump something up a hill, like from my feet
Yeah,
back to the heart, I wouldn't place the pump at the top of the hill. I'd place it at
right.
the bottom to push it up, right? So that doesn't quite make sense. And it turns out that the heart is not this pressure propulsion pump, and that it has three roles in the body that are what I think are what it's for. One is to vortex the blood. So we've talked about how blood moves without the need of a pumping heart. Um, and so one way that water can become energized so that it can form structured water and then
Mm,
form on the lining of the arteries and then move the blood. And you also have to think about lymphatic fluid. There's no pump there, but that fluid
right.
moves.
Yeah,
Cerebral spinal fluid is the same way. Water in the roots of a tree somehow gets up to the leaves. There's no pump there. And
yeah,
it's all moving by this mechanism. And so the heart, because it's the way that it's oriented, it's one big band of muscle that's wrapped up on itself. And so when a heart contracts, it kind of the signal goes around like that and it spirals and it goes like this.
right, right.
And so that vortexes, it creates these vortices, which is like if you have like a 2 liter
Wow.
bottle of water and you spin it around, it creates that vortex in the middle.
Yeah,
That's what I'm talking about. So in Dr.
nice.
Pollock's lab, they've shown that vortexing water energizes it. So that's what one role of the heart is, to energize it so that it can move the blood later. Um, the other role is that there's actually research that shows that it actually slows the flow of blood. The heart slows it because if during exertion, the blood or the body or the tissues want more oxygen and nutrients to the tissues while we're exercising, and all the blood would go over to the arterial side and flood over there and just super saturate it, and the venous side wouldn't have enough fluid to maintain the pressure and it would collapse. And so the heart actually, at times of exertion, slows the flow of blood, which is why athletes, endurance athletes, can get growth of the heart because it's actually more effective at slowing the flow of blood. And there's very interesting studies done on soccer players that
Wow.
show this. It's not pumping it more. Endurance athletes, it's actually slowing the flow more because of their activities. And so that's the second one. It maintains the pressure between the two systems so it doesn't collapse. And then the third and most fascinating to me role of the heart is that, the work of like the Heart Math Institute has showed us that every organ has an electromagnetic field and or emits an electromagnetic field, just like every human does. And but every
Mm,
organ has their own, and the heart's electromagnetic field is the largest of any organ in the body. Like they say, it's estimate up to 5,000 times stronger than the brains, which you would think would be the highest electromagnetic organ, but it's actually the heart because of its density of mitochondria. And
mm,
that electromagnetic field is what is sensing our external environment as well as our internal environment. And based on how well we are connected and communicating to our external environment and how well our internal environment is communicating with itself, which means
mm,
fascia and cellular communication, that's communicating, or the state of that communication is communicating coherence to the heart. And the heart
mm.
is then communicating coherent or incoherent signals to the brain. And the brain is responding accordingly by telling the body, okay, we're in a stress or non-stress state because of this coherence or incoherence.
Mhm.
And there's actually fascinating research that shows that this is what's happening. And so the heart is a sensory organ that's censoring or sensing those states as well as our emotional state, which is why we say things like, I love you with all my heart, or I gave it all my heart. There's just emotion behind this. Or we don't say, I love you with all my brain or
Right.
all my spleen or whatever. We say heart. And because it has this emotional connection. And,
Hmm.
there's more communication from the heart to the brain than there is brain to the heart.
Hmm.
And that's the way it is for most organs, because the brain's just a processing center.
Hmm.
It's just interpreting all the signals that we're getting from our sensory environment. We have way more than five senses, and we sense that stuff. The brain interprets it and then tells the body how to react according to that. So that's the three roles of the heart, none of which are to forcefully move blood throughout the body.
Wow. I love all this talk. Joe Dispenza fan too, so now I'm all like my
Yeah.
mind's all going all over the place. By the way, this is super random, but I just had to say I literally like I just was getting something in my email and it has to do with Dr. Gerald Pollack, right? There's a do you know Victor Sokolovsky, Lightwater
I don't
Scientific?
know him.
Oh, you
No.
need to know him. You know Robert Slovak, right? The water
Yeah.
guy.
Hmm.
So for listeners like the Quinton, I don't know,
Hmm.
Quentin Quinton,
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
Waters, that's Robert Slovak. And then Victor Sokolovsky is you would like him a whole
Sounds
bunch.
like it.
He's light water with Robert Slovak. And yeah, so it's a water company. And he talks about deuterium depletion a lot. Anyway,
Yeah.
super cool
Hmm.
dude. But he's doing a symposium. I just got this. It's got Dr. Jack Cruz, Dr. Gerald Pollack, a bunch of cool
Wow.
people. Tracy does. She's awesome.
Yeah.
So if anybody
Sounds like
wants
a
to
water
go,
conference.
yeah, it's a water conference. It's
Yeah.
called Water Symposium. It's in watersymposium.com if anybody wants to check that out. I'm
Cool.
pretty pumped about it. I think I'm managing or doing like a panel or something. It looks like I just saw that on there. I was like, oh, okay, yay. I will find out.
Congrats.
Yeah. I'm like, is this supposed to be on here? Was that an accident? Um, all right. Let's see. So, there was one other thing I wanted to hit on. Oh, stretching. I just want to bring this up.
Mm,
I've been geeking out on stretching so hard. I have been going on like a stretching like bonanza crazy. It's like Stretch Fest 2024 over here. And it has been so eye-opening. Like I've always like stretched here and there, but I'm talking like I've been stretching way more than I've been working out. Like it's been
mm,
like I'll go to the gym and just walk and then just like go on a crazy stretch bender. And then I get home and I'm like stretching, and I have been feeling so freaking good, and it has taken me on this huge thing with blood flow and nutrient
mhm,
delivery and not just range of motion, and it has landed me on cardiovascular benefits of stretching.
mhm,
So have you gotten onto this one yet or looked into that? I didn't realize like there was a study showing not that long ago, you probably know, that it showed that stretching was more effective at lowering blood pressure than walking.
mhm,
Than cardiovascular exercise? Are you
mhm.
familiar with this
Yeah.
already?
Well, and it's the same with like they've shown that with like yoga for a long time,
Yeah.
which yoga is a little more intense than just stretching, or it can be. But yeah, so the idea there. So this is kind of a it's kind of an abstract thing, or there's a lot to put together. So when we talk about coherence, we're talking about there's different ways you can communicate it, but one of the ways is internal body communication. So that means cells being able to sync up and communicate with each other. And they do that in multiple ways. One way they do it is through our fascia system, the fascia network of the body. And so the fascia network is not just this connective tissue that holds things together. It's literally interwoven and goes all the way down to the level of the DNA and then all the way
Mhm,
out to the level of what we think of gross fascia when we, dissect something, we see the connective tissue.
mhm,
And it's actually a communication highway. So fascia is made of, collagen protein, and the collagen is actually surrounded by structured water if it's hydrated properly. And that makes it like a semiconducting wire, like the copper wire in your wall. And so electrons can pass through that. And that allows cells to communicate and pass information. One way they also communicate electromagnetically and through light and through free radicals and things like that. But when we gently stretch, like when we compress. So like if you're getting like a massage and people are compressing
Mhm.
your fascia, or you're stretching fascia, putting tension on it in different ways, it creates a piezoelectric effect, which literally creates electrons through that stretch or compression. And when you create those electrons, it, one, breaks up scar tissue, and two, which scar tissue is dehydrated fascia, fascia without structured water on it. And it creates electrons that are passed down that collagen all the way down to the level of cells. And so what that's doing is creating more coherent, it's creating more body communication, right?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
what is high blood pressure? High blood pressure is it's an issue with the wrong signaling to the body. The body's getting a signal to increase blood pressure, usually in response to what people would say is autonomic imbalance, right? Too much of a stress signal. But what's communicating that stress signal? What's telling the brain to communicate that stress signal? Incoherence, right? So if we're in a situation where, our external environment is stressful, our internal environment can't communicate with itself, our cells
Mhm.
can't communicate,
Mhm.
that's communicating incoherence to the heart. And then that incoherence is related to the brain. The brain's like, this is stressful, and it has the stress
Mhm.
response to the body because it thinks we need to get
Mhm.
away from the threat, from this environment that's we're perceiving as stressful.
Mhm.
That's how it works. Like your body's just a big sensory organ. So we do something, anything literally, that helps restore internal communication and create more body coherence. It's going to send a different, more coherent signal through the heart to the brain, and that changes the way your brain
Mhm.
signals to the body. It's very fascinating, and it's like learning that type of thing has helped me make sense of so many different things, as far as chiropractic, as far as heart disease, so many things. That kind
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
I guess mentality of thinking about it.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was awesome. And I will say, like, I have been like super proactive about water and electrolytes more than ever right now. I've been stretching a lot, and I've been
Mhm.
doing my infrared red light. I have the Therasage, like the one that
Awesome.
your head comes out, and
Yeah.
then I've been wearing brain tap headset with that every morning. I've been doing that for like a month straight, and drinking tons and stretching. And I am a living, breathing example of everything you just said, because I'm like,
Yeah.
yep,
That's
I
that's
know,
true
know
hydration.
from
You know,
what you're saying.
like,
Like I feel what you're saying is what
yeah,
I'm
you feel
saying.
it. You feel the difference. And
Yeah.
for someone like you to already have a high level of health and to feel the difference from that, it just shows how impactful it is. But that's
It's a
true
lot.
hydration.
Yeah.
People just drink water a lot and they think, oh, I'm staying hydrated, but you
Right.
need light. Like you need light because
Yeah.
light is what hydrates the fascia,
Mm.
right? So if you want to stretch and break up the scar tissue or get massage and various body work therapies, and then you hydrate with mineral rich water, and then you
Mhm.
get light, you get the infrared light
Mhm.
or the red light. That's what structures the water onto the fascia once it's broken
Mhm.
up the scar tissue. That's how you truly hydrate.
Yeah, thanks. Cool. Yeah, I've even been getting outside like in the evening, like afterwards. I went for a bike ride like a little kid by myself for like I'm just
Mhm.
going all around the neighborhood. I'm like, I just want to be out here. It feels amazing, you know?
Yeah, well, it's
And
do
it's
things
been
like a
great.
kid would do because that's what kids do. They go out and they're
Yeah.
outside, they run around like crazy. Like,
Yeah.
go do it again.
Yeah, I will. All right, this has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Again, I just want to like direct everybody towards your book. It's called Understanding the Heart: Surprising Insights into the Evolutionary Origins of Heart Disease and Why It Matters by Dr. Stephen Hussey. It's Dr. Stephen Hussey on Instagram.
Mhm.
Is that the main place that you serve people publicly?
Yeah, just social media is Dr. Stephen Hussey, Dr. Stephen Hussey, and then my website is resourceyourhealth.com.
Resource,
Yeah,
resourceyourhealth.com. Okay,
yeah,
cool. All right, cool. We will link that all up. Thank you so much. It was
yeah,
such
of
an
course.
amazing episode. Can't wait
Yeah,
to
thanks
share
for
it with
having me.
everybody.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Inside Out Health Podcast. I hope this episode served as inspiration and something that you needed to hear in your life. If you have a friend or family member that you think would benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And also, please subscribe. I have so many more amazing guests coming. I have just been so gifted and honored to meet so many incredible health professionals in my career, and I cannot wait to share their messages with you guys. So please subscribe. And if you could be so kind as to rate my show, I would really appreciate it. This podcast is honestly an intuitive call to me to help spread goodness to the world. And so if you guys can help me do that, I would really appreciate it. If you want more info on this guest, pop over to my website, check out my podcast section, and you can get links to everything we talked about in the show, and find out more about this guest and where you can go from here. Make sure you're also following me on Instagram. That is my most active platform. You can find me at Coach Tara Garrison. You can also find me on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter. Everything is Coach Tara Garrison across the board. And then, if you want to send me a message, guys, and let me know other guests or other topics you want to hear on the show, please let me know. I am here to serve you. So would love to hear from you, would love your feedback on the show. And if you share any of these episodes, please tag me on social media. It's Coach Tara Garrison.